Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Davis. I'm the moderator of the panel that's called Best Practices and Innovative Tools for Sustainable Urban Resources. And we have 6 very esteemed speakers who are our guest from Stockholm was not able to come, but we have 6 great speakers, of which 3 are here in person. I'm so excited to be here with some real people. I want to say that I'm going to make a few general kind of background remarks before I turn it over to the panel. And at that time, I'll introduce all 6 of our panelists and give them an opportunity to share their thoughts with us. I want to say a little something about the panel and maybe why I got asked to do this. In a way, we are taking a bit of a deviation from the deep dive focus on urban financing, but I'm sure we're going to come back to it in the conversation. I mean, when I say a deviation, I think that what we want to do in this panel is remind all of us of the overall aims and the larger mission of the Urban Economy Forum, which is to kind of create a global conversation about challenges of sustainability on many different dimensions. Of course, this year's conference is focused on financing, but ultimately financing, as we've been hearing a little bit in some of the prior commentaries, is not unrelated to other major goals, equity, etc., that are very important for us. So I think one reason that Reza was nice enough to ask me to present here is that I've been working with a team of students at Harvard's Graduate School of Design to develop a virtual pavilion that would be about knowledge sharing and best practices, although I'm not a big fan of the concept best practices, I like good enough practices, that would be the heart of some of the conversations which are happening here today and will continue to happen. And our students worked for a year almost thinking and going through the literature on sustainability to try to think about the concept, the structure, the nature of a global platform to share and disseminate best practices. And I think that we built on a couple different things. I think I originally was asked to do this in part because I worked for 4 years on a project that was funded by the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations that was doing case studies of sustainable transportation transformations in sustainability through the lens of transportation. And what we did in that project was focus more on the move beyond the what, because in a way, everybody in here knows what needs to be done. But the question is, how do you get it done? So we were focusing from moving to the focus on how, which meant implementation, which of course meant governance and a variety of stakeholders, not just the private sector, mayors, citizens, elected officials, citizens at many different scales. So what we did is try to take some of the insights. Oh, and I would mention that the policies that we looked at in the VREF project were all very different because all the countries we looked at were very different. So we studied how it was possible to get congestion charging in Stockholm, but in New York City, we looked at pedestrianization of streets. In Mexico, we looked at BRT. This is a point I'm going to come back to with our panelists. All cities are not alike. So the thought that we can have a general conversation about sustainability, whether it's about finance or not, is something we have to think about carefully. And if I could be, I know we're going to be talking about for the next few days, but we've had a bit of a bias to focus on the global north so far in the conversation. And I'm hoping that we remember that UEF cares about the globe. And even thinking, and I would say especially thinking about financial tools, they are going to be so different in a place like Toronto, Stockholm, Helsinki, or Kingston, Jamaica, someplace like that. So anyway, so we have prepared a report, and I would just want to share some of the basic principles of the report, because they're going to lead me to questions that I'm asking our panelists in a sense, and I'm not even sure if all of you got the email that I sent. I know you did, but I sent these questions in advance, but I'll just share very quickly. I'm not going to give you, I had a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to use it. We will make that report available through UEF about kind of how to share knowledge, how to learn and share knowledge on a global scale about the most important challenges that are kind of connected to sustainability. But there were 6, well, I would say 6.5 underlying assumptions in the project. One was that the economy and the environment are connected and need to be treated as such. Second, the local is not independent, and many other scales need to be considered when addressing equity as part of promoting a holistic approach, which isn't to say that I'm moving or we're moving the direction away from the local, but understand that local is embedded in different territorial scales. 3, SDG 11 is not the only important goal for cities, but it's a strategic starting point for centering the urban within a larger SDG agenda. Equity and so many other things, housing, right to housing, et cetera, human rights. 4, conflict and implementation is inevitable, and it's important that that remains visible. 5, focusing on the how, this is the main point, is crucial to achieving sustainability, and that means moving beyond, these are my words, a best practice mindset to learn from everyday struggles and challenges. So it's not as easy as just saying, oh, we did this in this city, you can do that too. Every place is going to be struggling in their different contexts. The 6th principle is activating change requires working with long-standing partners and new allies. So not the same usual suspects always, that maybe we have to invent new relationships and bring new people to the table. And I guess I would just say the 7th point was that all cities are not alike. I really want to highlight the global north versus the global south. There are poorer cities and richer cities, and all cities are embedded in different political, economic, and social contexts. So that's the principle behind what we tried to do. We created a kind of a set of portals where people could like focus on what we call the urban challenges that were linked to sustainability. And I'm not going to read all of them because one here are our commentators. One of the 6 urban challenges, will have a special portal on the site, is about reliable and strategic financing, but it's not the only one, and it's a separate idea. There's also growth of institutional multi-level support for sustainability, strategic development, use of data, technological innovation, ensuring sustainability of urban ecological systems. There are a series of things that we want people who visit the site to be thinking about, and even if they're an expert on data or an expert on financing, to be able to embed that challenge in the context of other challenges. So that was one thing, and we also will have a portal for innovations, and we've heard about many already, and maybe we'll hear about more today. But these innovations, one are in resources and financing, but they're also in terms of territorial innovations, governance innovations, and innovations in monitoring, so sets of things like that. Now, coming out of this project, what I thought that would be, we have an amazing opportunity to learn from our panelists today about the possibilities and pitfalls of knowledge sharing across different contexts. Because the virtual portal is intended to share knowledge, but the question becomes how useful is that knowledge for, maybe Toronto can talk to Baltimore and can talk to Helsinki, but do we have to think a little bit more about curating those conversations so you have clustering of cities that are more like each other that can share knowledge? So what I wanted to ask our panelists today, and they may already have something prepared, and if you have something prepared, that's fine. But I gave them 4 questions. Any one of them I thought they could reflect on, and if they don't want to do that and just share whatever they had planned before I had the audacity to send you some questions 2 days ago, that's fine. But the first one was giving some examples of knowledge drawn or shared from organizations, programs, or policy successes outside their own city, nation, or their own agency. So ask them if they've ever used an idea that came from someplace else. Second, again, if there are any pitfalls, as well as the possibilities of relying on best practices drawn from someplace else. Third, how much power do local actors, including mayors, maybe we even say including corporations, as opposed to national or international actors and agencies, have in advancing sustainability? Again, I want to focus on the urban, but we have to be realistic about what is the power of the urban. And if you don't feel like there's sufficient power at the local level, what allies have you found have been most useful to enhance your capacities in this regard? Because we have mayor, we have people working for the UN, et cetera. And finally, what do you consider to be the greatest barrier to sustainability And how have you overcome or tried to overcome those barriers? So another way of asking that question, it has to do with the title of the panel. Which resources, financial, political, social, communicative, or so on, have been most useful to you? Maybe it's money, but maybe it's not money. So those are the questions that I've asked our esteemed panelists, and let me just introduce them to you, and we will go in the order that they're listed here. And the first, Matthew Green, I think he's online, Member of Parliament from Hamilton Centre, Canada. Then we will have Debbie Stewart, the Vice President of Innovations and Partnership, CMHC, Canadian and Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Then Delroy Williams here in person, the Mayor, the Honorable Mayor of Kingston, Jamaica. Michaela Kauer, the head of the Brussels office of the City of Vienna, Eurocities program. Julia Deans, the president and CEO of the Habitat for Humanity here in Canada. And then I mentioned Marguerite is unable to join us. Then we have Frank DeHont, virtual co-chair of the World Urban Pavilion Steering Committee and the Secretary General of the International Society of Urban and Regional Planners. And finally, Masoud Ganchi, the Director of IPRO Capital. So I'll turn it over to, I guess somebody's in charge of our first person who's online. I guess that's you, that's Matthew.
Unfortunately, we can't hear you, Mr. Matthew.
How about now?
Perfect.
I see the faces on Zoom. This is the Zoom malaise that we're in right now, but what an incredible opportunity to visit you all here. I'm in the House of Commons. I'm actually on House duty. I stepped out to be involved in this very important discussion. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm here from the ancestral territories of the unceded Algonquin people, and it is the frame from settler colonialism and land use that I think I'd like to begin some of my remarks. I do, however, want to just make sure I'm aware of how much time I have for my remarks. Can somebody maybe put a hand up so that I don't speak too long? Is anybody able to let me know? 5 minutes, is that right? Okay.
5,
well,
7, 5%.
Perfect. As a parliamentarian, we're pretty tight on time, so I'll make sure that I start my time and begin. I want to just situate the conversation. Prior to coming to the House of Commons as a member of Parliament, I was a city councillor, and I was tasked with looking at the symptoms of decades of really poor land use and urbanization within the province of Ontario. You know, as a city councillor, I had the opportunity, in fact, to attend Quito for the Habitat 3. And out of that conference, of course, what was identified in 2016 was war, catastrophic climate change, and urbanization as being the three major themes that we would ultimately face. And boy, did we ever face those in Canada, and particularly in my home city of Hamilton. We watched successive waves of Afghans and Syrians, and of course, most recently Ukrainians coming into the context of a absolutely out of control housing market, one that had been completely commodified by foreign investors and massive real estate investment trusts, where the process of having a housing market had been completely co-opted by the real estate industry and the financial sector, and the financialization and commodification of housing has put the ability for most people, both new and multi-generational folks here in my community, it put it out of their reach. And so, like, what does that look like from a municipal perspective? One of the things that I tried to do as a city councillor in looking at sustainability and understanding the constraints of municipal governments in Canada, I would share with you that in Ontario, for instance, we are really susceptible to suburbanization and suburban encroachment onto our agricultural fields based on the simple fact that municipalities are only funded two ways. They're funded through building permits and property taxes. We are in fact the beneficiaries of gentrifications in our municipal centers, which in my opinion skews a lot of the decision making towards this notion of infinite growth and expansion. And for decades it has been out. Now we're seeing it go up in terms of more dense interurban development of condos. But the condoization of housing in cities like Hamilton and others across the country still don't result in the adequate access to affordability for people. So while our, while the housing market was obviously fueled by liquidity supports that were put out during COVID to the tune of about $750 billion of quantitative easing here in Canada, we found that those low interest rates either did two things. They benefited big corporations and REITs to go on a shopping spree, or it put people in borrowing perhaps more than they can afford, which is what we're seeing now with the rising of interest rates and the impeding and likely recession that we're going to face, where people are overnight having to pay hundreds of dollars more for their mortgages than they did when they initially signed up under some of the lower variable rates. So what did that look like? I mean, for me as a city councilor, it looked like trying to put Band-Aids on gunshot wounds. That for those that know Hamilton, they would know that we are the canary in the coal mine. We have been facing the economic ripples of Bay Street and Toronto and international markets for decades. First through the neoliberal free trade agreements that came through with NAFTA and deindustrialized our city, and then in subsequent waves of the speculation of the housing markets within our city. I have to tie the financial incentives of municipalities to build and to force the appreciation and gentrification of communities with the displacement of Hamiltonians, multi-generational people, and the inability of newcomers to adequately settle within our cities. So what did that mean for me? Well, it meant that rather than dealing with the symptoms, I would try to come to Ottawa as a federal member and apply what I had observed within our municipal centers at a federal level, dealing with the systems. And, we have with us today members from CMHC. The whole impetus of CMHC coming out of World War II was to build victory homes for people to be able to provide low-cost housing, which was a direct federal intervention into the market that allowed for the affordability for working class people to be able to purchase homes commensurate to the salaries that they were making at that time. I think that, the only way in which we can begin to unpack the economic sustainability of an out of control real estate market is to go back to direct state interventions that decommodify the market, to wrestle it back from the big corporations, the REITs, the foreign investors, and allow for the affordability of the individual actor to come in and actually, participate in this market. And I know I don't have a lot of time, but I think within the abilities to talk about the way in which corruption and criminality, money laundering play a significant role within our housing market, absent of any controls. And this is where I'm going to tie this together from the federal to the municipal. Absent of any direct controls, real meaningful controls on the way in which organized crime, money laundering, and corruption are active here in Canada in our housing market, we can forget having any influence at the municipal level. In fact, municipal levels of government are often the most heavily influenced by big developers in terms of the way in which elections are financed. We're in a municipal election right now, and with the inability for staff really to adequately defend against the onslaught of capital and the wholesale commodification. So this is, me talking about a REIT coming in with $1 billion and buying up entire blocks of communities. These are things that that are on the horizon. And, before we can tie the ecological impacts and the inabilities of municipalities to adequately fund end of life cycle infrastructure, i.e. roads, sewers, and the like, until we can solve that question and have adequate upper levels of government financing urban development, we're going to continue to see the erosion and the wholesale crumbling of our infrastructure locally. I'll give you two examples and then I'll close. In Hamilton, we're talking about mobility, but the way in which our public transit is potentially being sold off or privatized through Metrolinx and the LRT is a big problem. That sometimes the things that we think are solutions for sustainability end up driving inequality and driving the financialization of our public goods. And the second piece, particularly as it relates to olding and aging infrastructure, when you look at the way we expand into the suburban settings, we're never able to recoup that costs, and it leaves municipalities, of course, with things where we have combined stormwater systems, which in Hamilton resulted in a catastrophic flood of sewage going directly into our harbor. So 7 minutes, I hope that I was able to touch on some of the key issues, and I certainly look forward to the distinguished guests that you've brought here, the very accomplished people for this particular forum. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Councillor. It's great. I just want to pull out the two of them in response. So looking at the pitfalls, some financing tools will create displacement and gentrification, and also thank you so much for the comment about the importance of the federal scale and understanding what you can do with respect to corruption at the local level. Again, two themes that we've looked at a lot with Reza and Alex, et cetera, kind of looking at the multi-scalar context in which sustainability has happened. So great. So we'll move now to Debbie Stewart, who I also believe is online.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes. VP of Innovations and Partnership, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Agency.
Thank you, Diane, and good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here. Diane, unfortunately, I didn't get your questions. I think they're fantastic questions, though. So what I'm going to do is I was going to talk about the financial aspect of sustainable urban resources. I'll carry on with that, but what I'll do, because I do, your questions are so compelling, I'm going to integrate just a few thoughts as I go through it and try to just to give a little flavor of that as I move through my my talk. So as you mentioned, I am the Vice President of Innovation and Partnerships at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, and MP Green actually just mentioned our origin story and how we got started. We work at the national level here in Canada, and we're Canada's National Housing Agency. And my team in particular, what we do is we really focus on bringing new and existing participants within the housing sector together to understand problems very holistically. So we want to understand it from all the actors and everyone who is impacted or involved in a particular problem. And then we want to co-develop solutions together. So that's a core focus of our work. My team has a particular focus on sustainable financing. And the reason for that is because affordable housing developers, municipalities, others tell us that affordable financing is it's a persistent barrier to their work. And of course, even more so now with the current economic environment and conditions. And so that's what I was going to do today, is really just highlight some of our work around innovative and sustainable financing. I am going to share my screen though, because I have a few slides. And so if you just bear with me for about 2 seconds, I'll pull that up. Oh, actually, I guess I can't. The screen sharing is disabled.
I'll help with that.
It's no worries. I can go without it.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'll do then is just give you a little bit more context around CMHC, because I think that's really critical. And Diane, this is actually where I want to integrate some thoughts and comments around, relying on best practices, and also whether best practices in one jurisdiction can be relevant and applied to other jurisdictions. So as I mentioned, CMHC is Canada's National Housing Agency. And so we're Canada's authority on housing, and we work clear across all aspects of housing. So we contribute to the stability of the financial system and housing markets. We provide support to Canadians who are in housing need. We offer unbiased research, market analysis and insights, and advice to all levels of government, to consumers, and to the housing industry. So we're quite active across all that involves housing. And as MP Green just prior to me mentioned, we were created following World War II, and it really was about housing returning war veterans. Our mandate is to help improve housing conditions, so housing, but also living conditions in Canada. And honestly, our mission is very much the same today. To accomplish this, we created a very ambitious aspiration. We aligned it very deliberately with the timing of the Sustainable Development Goals. So our ambitious aspiration is that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. It's ambitious because, of course, we're only 7 years out. But also when we refer to needs, we're talking about this in the very broadest sense. So of course, from housing that is affordable to a wide range of people, but also accessible, green, sustainable, climate compatible, climate resilient, but also that supports social inclusion through diverse neighborhoods, is close to major transit lines, jobs, services, amenities, etc. So very much aligned as well with the Sustainable Development Goal 11 in particular. And this aspiration, this bold aspiration, is the basis for our company strategy. So it really drives all decisions that we make, our investment decisions, the policies and programs that we develop and that we implement. And in particular, because this goal is quite bold and obviously quite aspirational, it calls on all of us. So not just it's not just a goal, I guess, for CMHC, but it's actually a national goal. And it really is intended to kind of rally governments, including cities, housing providers, not-for-profit housing developers, operators, the private sector and others to seek out innovative ways to support this goal of affordability for all. So it is very much about this rallying call and saying we all need to come together to work towards this. And so what I want to do is maybe just talk about 3 ways that we're really looking at sustainable finance in helping us achieve this ambitious aspiration. So one of them is through the National Housing Strategy. So this is a pan-Canadian 10-year strategy, $72+ billion have been invested in it. And it's a plan really to give more Canadians a place to call home and a home that they can afford. And this is actually, Diane, where I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts with regards to the relevance of best practices and that type of thing, because the National Housing Strategy was launched in 2017, fairly new for Canada, where it's about 5 years through. We have another 5 years of the initially conceived of plan. And it was developed really based on a lot of research around what was happening globally. And I would say that the extent to which those best practices were helpful really were for inspiration. And then there was a lot of adaptation and modification that needed to happen. So it was really about stimulating thought and inspiring different ideas. But it was not something where you could just take something and plunk it down here in Canada and it would be effective. So that's one thing that I wanted to share. The other thing around the National Housing Strategy, though, is we're a national organization. It is intended to cover the entire country. As you know, Canada is a very vast, very diverse country, and we're dealing with very distinct needs, even here within one country, from the far north to our big cities, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And one of the things that we learned very quickly, and we learned it through trial and error, honestly, is that even within one country, a consistent or pan-Canadian approach doesn't work. It really needs to be customized, and it's very much think local, but have the scale and the power of the spending power really of a national government. And so along the way, we've had to make lots of changes. We've learned an awful lot, and we've had to make lots of changes. What we learned is that from a national perspective, we need very flexible tools, and we need to be, I guess, humble in understanding that we're not going to know the diversity of needs or conditions across the country, and that we need to be willing to learn and to adapt. So that's my comment on the National Housing Strategy. But the National Housing Strategy effectively was designed to support the creation and repair of affordable housing for those in greatest need. And it was also designed to create a new generation of housing in Canada. So housing that supports diversity and inclusion is a catalyst for sustainable, accessible, mixed income, mixed use communities. And basically through the National Housing Strategy, CMHC finances the construction and repair of rental housing. So this is one key way around the financing aspect. And how do we support the broader goals around affordability, social goals, climate goals, really is that we embed criteria in our funding programs. So in order to participate in our programs, there's an expectation that you're going to be delivering outcomes beyond just the building, but really thinking about how the building fits within the broader community and is providing the right kind of home and opportunities for the people who are going to be living there. So we embed criteria around affordability, accessibility, energy efficiency, and also social outcomes directly into our programs. And then the other piece with our programs is that we encourage partnerships. So we know that we can't have one source of funding. That's not sustainable long-term. Governments come and go, and priorities and needs change from a political or government level. And so really trying to build in that instinct towards seeking partners so that there's diversity of funding and long-term sustainable funding is something that we've embedded within that strategy. And so I'll just quickly touch on two other areas that we, ways that we support sustainable financing. So one is through partnerships. So beyond the partnerships in the National Housing Strategy, my team also works across the country to form partnerships. And as I mentioned before, we're focused very much on sustainable finance, amongst other things, but sustainable financing is an area that we do have a lot of focus on. And we work with partners to co-create a particular solution. So I'll just quickly share a few examples that we're working on now. So we're exploring whether a web platform might be effective in terms of connecting social impact investors with affordable housing developers. And also what kind of conditions or marketplace can we put around that to facilitate the development of affordable housing? So that's one area that we're working with a number of partners to explore. Another area is we're working with the philanthropic sector and saying, how can we support impact investing within the affordable housing space, and in particular to preserve the existing affordable housing that we have, because that housing is currently home to many, many low and modest income families, but it's at risk of being lost to redevelopment into other things. So this is one area that we're working with the impact investment community to see how we might be able to support that. And just one final example is with regards to, so actually here in Toronto, one of the things that we're working on is how can we support the deep climate retrofit of an existing affordable housing building while minimizing displacement of the current tenants and avoiding rent increases. And so we're looking at different processes, funding mechanisms, and partnerships that would really enable that. So it's one challenge I'm sure many people are experiencing across the country. And so that's really, I know we don't have much time, so that's, and I look probably at time, but I really just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of some of the work that we're doing, and with the hopes of stimulating thoughts out there as well. And I just encourage anyone to check our website, cmhc.ca, if you're interested in our programs, or reach out if you have any other ideas that you've tried in your own jurisdictions and would like to chat about. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Debbie.
Yeah, I guess we should go that for Matthew, and I wish we had more time to hear more. It sounds like you're doing a lot of amazing things. Let's turn it over to Mayor Delroy Williams. Mayor Williams.
Good afternoon. Are you here? Oh, yes. Good afternoon. I'll try and use the limited time. I know you're have a time issue now. So use the limited time I have just to introduce you to what exists now in Kingston in terms of your topic, and then try and answer two of the four questions you asked. So let me first say, just introduce you to the fact that we all know that urbanization is accelerating. We are quite aware that 50% of the world's population live in cities, and that by 2050 that will increase to just over 65%. We're quite aware that the 70% of the world's global waste is produced in cities, and that cities consume approximately 80% of the world's energy. Cities come with challenges, but also with multiple benefits. Cities, in my estimation, is still the best experimentation that we have today. And it is accelerating, and urbanization is accelerating because there is no other experimentation today that can replace cities. And when we talk about benefits, we're talking about economic benefits, other benefits, social, etc., but primary economic, commercial benefits. So cities come with benefits that outweigh the challenges we face. The concentration of people and infrastructure in a geographically defined space is critical. It's important. As a matter of fact, in Kingston, many of the challenges we face now in the city of Kingston is because Kingston evolved in what I would say in an unplanned manner. So Kingstonians live right across the length and breadth of the geographic space, which creates problems. It creates problems with infrastructure, sewage infrastructure, water, power infrastructure, the supply of power, and transportation, all of that. And people are demanding that you bring the infrastructure to them where they are. But if Kingston had evolved in a planned manner where you concentrate the resources and the people and the infrastructure in a planned way, Kingston would be a far better city to live. So the direction we are taking, we have to look at city manager is to move Kingston in the direction of planning the development of Kingston and concentrating people and infrastructure in defined spaces. That also have other issues, social issues, cultural issues. People are used to living a particular way. So for example, multifamily development. So when the municipality approves today multifamily development in city space where you're basically going up, you're met with huge challenges from residents who are used to living a particular way, who are used to a single family way of living. And you have to take the time to explain to them that the way you live is not necessarily the way your children would want to live. And the way we live today will change over time. And so, but that's a huge political issue for someone who has to face an election. But still you have to do what is right. So arising out of urbanization are many challenges. Challenges of housing. The substandard housing abound in many cities, in Kingston. And so you have to look at the issue of affordable housing. How do you come up with designs and housing solutions that are cost effective, that you can finance and to address the issue of housing within cities? So the city of Kingston has been exploring designs and best practices, and we have been collaborating with central government in terms of a program that we call social housing assistance, where in fact we just build houses in low-income neighborhoods, and you do that as cost-effective as you can. So that is something that we're still exploring in terms of designs and financing. There's the issue of waste management that arises from urbanization, big issue in the city of Kingston. Sewage, infrastructure, water, road infrastructure. So all of these are challenges that we face. It's difficult for small island developing states and for low-income cities. It's very difficult for us to address the issues the challenges arising, because in a large sense, we don't have the funds to finance the studies. We don't have the resources or the investment to invest in the research, to pay the technocrats, and to finance the infrastructure repairs, renovation or replacement. So where cities like Kingston ought to go? One, the issue of financing is important. But then what we have been doing is there are existing studies So there are studies that exist and there are solutions that are established. So part of what we do is look for existing studies and we look for established solutions. I just answer one of your questions now in this, is that have we found solutions that exist in other countries that we have used? Yes. For example, the Kingston Harbour. The Kingston Harbour is a major asset to Kingston. Right now we're in the phase of redevelopment, re-imaging of Kingston, the repositioning of Kingston as a destination city. We have cruise ship arriving in the Kingston Harbour now, just prior to the COVID pandemic. We were able to do that because we found a solution in terms of a floating pier from a Norwegian company, Seawalk. Because in the Kingston Harbour is a World Heritage Site, a section of it in a city called Port Royal that is named Port Royal. 2/3 of Port Royal is beneath the sea. And in order to protect that site, we could not construct a normal pier, a cruise ship pier. We had to use a floating pier. And we were able to do that from borrow a construction or a pier from a Norwegian company. But the issue is, the major issue in the Kingston Harbour is one relating to pollution. It's plastic entering the Kingston Harbour, it's solid waste, and generally, and sewage. Through NGOs, we were able to find a solution that exists outside of the city. It's really, we were able to use interceptor and barrier technologies to capture the waste at the entrance of the harbour and to remove that waste from the harbour, which is both plastic and solid waste, and to take it to a site and then separate the plastic from the solid waste, the other solid waste. And that we were able to borrow from a Norwegian company. I would say the last thing, I know time is going, the last is with respect to pitfalls. Most problems or challenges come with three aspects: physical, financial, and social. I'd say it's a problem of complexity. We term it a problem of complexity, that the challenges are complex in nature. They are complex in nature because they transcend disciplines and organizational boundaries. So the solutions have to be complex. So solutions are to take in all the aspects, the physical, the financial, the social, etc. A lot of the solutions we find focus on the physical. But you can't ignore the financial and the social. There are some solutions that would take in the physical and the financial, but exclude the social. That's a major pitfall. I give you an example as I wrap up. Let's say, for example, transportation. You get solutions abounding about that you should use different modes of transportation. The city of Kingston should be going rail, or we should be using other. And people will talk about the solutions as if the physical part of the solution is good enough. When you have to address the issue of how people commute. In Kingston, people are using your car is luxury, it's image, it's convenience. So to get people to move from cars to public transport is a huge social issue. It's a huge PR campaign, it's a huge educational campaign. So your solutions, when you're speaking about solutions and how they are different, apply differently to different cities, that's important. But do we still need to borrow solutions from other countries and other cities? Of course, but you have to have a filtering system of filtering solutions and then applying them to your specific situation. I hope I would have addressed some of your concerns, or I hope I would have been beneficial to the audience in some of what I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. Let's hear now from Michaela Cower. on Zoom.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
That's good. Okay. No, I'm really happy. Greetings from Vienna. I'm currently in Vienna, and in the center, in the heart of Europe. And I'm really, really excited to be with all of you today. It's already evening and dark outside here in Vienna. I can inform you. The time difference is a little bit like 6 hours. I was listening to all the speakers now very, very carefully, and I'm really tempted to talk about the Vienna model of social housing, because I think it's an explanation how you can really do something about the whole aspect that Matthew was mentioning, the negative effects of financialization, of gentrification that you can achieve with a model such as the one we have in Vienna. But let me first maybe give a comment to one of the questions that were posed by Diane. And I think we didn't discuss it that much yet. It's the issue of governance. You mentioned the importance of governance in all of the things that we are doing with regard to sustainable urban resources, sustainable urban finances. And I would like to highlight first one aspect before I, of course, come back to the issue of housing, because that's so vital for so many people. But with regard to finances and governance, I would like to raise one aspect. That is that how can we really secure stable city budgets? And stable city budgets are very often composed of, and that's also coming into the multi-level governance dimension that Diane was referring to. Stable city budgets, they don't fall from heaven, you know, you need to negotiate them with your national government. In Europe, when you are an EU member state, you need also to care for getting enough out of the EU funding sources, out of European Investment Bank and other public sources. So you're not only, you know, trying to influence your national government to get enough out of the whole tax revenue. What you're also doing is you're trying to get influence on European level to make cities an integral part of EU policy design, because that again will lead to more direct funding for cities. Something that we in Europe, the European cities, are really calling for a lot, especially when we are talking about the whole new Green Deal of the European Union, the need to digitalize our societies, economies in a much bigger, to a much bigger extent than we have it now. The need to care for our people well, so that we really keep up the European welfare model. At the same time, while we need to account for the climate change. So all of these issues cannot be done without cities. And one of our main causes at the moment on European level is really to set for a strong urban agenda on European level in all policy fields, because we cannot rely, many cities in Europe cannot rely on their national government when it comes to getting the equal share out of the European budget. So this is one aspect of governance I wanted to highlight, something that maybe not so much in the Canadian discussion, but at least in the European discussion, this is a very strong momentum at the moment. Clearly also because we all need to find money for how do we do with Ukraine? How do we do with the climate crisis? How do we do with this social and economic crisis in the aftermath of the pandemic? Now, coming to Vienna a bit more, and because I don't want to be, focusing only on the European scale, but coming to Vienna, I think one thing that we have been doing in the last more than like 100 years is that we never lost we never lost the courage to strong state intervention, the will to intervene in the market, in the society, in the way we are organizing our economy, because we saw that and we see it today more than ever. Matthew was referring to that very strongly, and also I think some of the other speakers in the panel before, the market is not the solution. The market is the problem. And at the moment, there is a little bit something like they turn it around, and very often we have this discussion that the state needs to explain itself and needs to, you know, prove that it's good for doing good things. But the problem is the state is the solution. The market is the problem at the moment, at least as long as you leave it to without any control mechanisms. And that's something that we, especially in Vienna, have learned. We need to intervene in the market, and we also need to intervene by money. So what we have been doing in Vienna for a long time is also, whenever we saw critical developments, problematic developments, whenever there was an economic crisis, we started to invest in a counter-cyclical way. What we did, for instance, in 2009, in the aftermath of the first global financial crisis, we decided that all our kindergartens would be cost-free for everybody, for every child from the first year on. So all the children from 1 to 6, when they start school, can go to kindergarten in Vienna. And what we did now, a few years later, about 10 years later, we looked at the economic effects of such a measure, of such a strong intervention, and we saw that the labor participation of women was rising. Women were getting more, had more time, so they could negotiate better contracts, better work contracts. We saw that the children were better off, and we saw that the whole region of Vienna was profiting in its own little, you know, in a macroeconomic way. So the prosperity of the region is clearly linked to cost-free kindergarten. We look at things like from this perspective in many, many ways, because we also have a strong tradition of gender budgeting in Vienna. And this is something which I want to close now, because I think I have consumed my time. I see the Diane nodding. My last word would be about whenever we discuss all of this, whenever we discuss taxation, security of city budgets, reliable public services, something the mayor of Kingston was very much pointing out, we also need to discuss this from the gender perspective. And we have to look at all of these aspects from a gender perspective. If you have great public transport, you will also see, this is a study we also did, better labor participation of women from certain areas which have been disconnected before. So my wish to the mayor of Kingston is that, yeah, go for that public transport campaign, because it will also help your women and it will empower the women in your city. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I understand we are standing in between you guys and lunch, so we've just got 3 more speakers. They're going to be great. So we'll turn it over now to to Julia. Next.
Hello. Hi, I'm Julia Deans from Habitat for Humanity Canada, and I'm part of the Habitat for Humanity network, which works in 70 countries around the world with the goal of everybody having a safe and affordable and decent place to call home. Today is World Habitat Day, and when we think of what is critical to having an inclusive and resilient and green future, housing is clearly very high up there. But we know that within a few decades, we could have 3 billion people living in inadequate housing around the world. I think a lot of you know what the issues. They're living with poverty and poor health and social injustice, made all the worse by climate change. Those who find housing have to spend much more of their income than most of us on their housing. And they probably are facing much higher costs because they're living in homes that are in poor repair and aren't insulated against extreme heat and cold. And this makes absolutely no sense when you think of it. Why are we putting these high costs on the people who can least afford it? And our global climate problem is only worsening as a result. So I'm going to abbreviate my comments, but my big message is we need to be collaborating across sectors, and we need to be bringing entrepreneurial solutions from right across the board. I did want to share with you an example of a challenge here in Toronto called the Race to Reduce that I helped to bring about as part of an organization called Civic Action. If you're interested in carbon emissions from commercial buildings, look up Race to Reduce. I won't take you through all the specifics, but basically it was a challenge to get tenants and building owners to work together to reduce carbon emissions from their buildings. And it resulted in a 10% reduction over 4 years, which was quite mammoth, and it's now become an industry-wide challenge. But I wanted to share it as an example of how sectors can come together to break old business models and make new ones. And often it's a charity or a government that's actually making the market. And boy, does the housing sector need some new business models now. Habitat for Humanity is very much committed to changing business models. Here in Canada, a land of very extreme temperatures, we are focusing on energy efficiency. And that includes new building technologies and energy efficiency measures like net zero homes, which can reduce or can improve efficiency by 80%, and passive homes, which can mean our habitat homeowners face up to 90% reduced energy costs. I think we all have to be looking at energy efficient homes as a way to minimize both the impact of the design and the construction, but also the cost going forward. At Habitat for Humanity globally, in 2016, Habitat International created the Trevillager Center for Innovation and Shelter, and they've been working on some really innovative housing products and services and financing to help families living with low income. Also working with partners across all sectors, financial institutions, manufacturers, academia, government and civil society, you name it. As somebody pointed out earlier, so much of this work happens locally though, where we've got families who don't have access to some of the formal housing options that many of us have had, like traditional mortgages or developer-built housing. For those people, housing is a process, it's not a purchase. And you've all been to places where you know that every year they're adding a little something, they're putting in a window, they're adding a door, whatever. That means that they've got big gaps in how well their homes are capable of withstanding climate and other pressures. So Habitat for Humanity developed something called Shelter Tech, which is now the world's leading platform for affordable housing innovation. It works across the spectrum from startups to universities and investors to find and scale solutions that will help families living with low income. They do everything from boot camps to global summits and providing funds and investment. So I just want to give you a few examples. In Bangalore, in India, there's a startup called Tavasta, which uses patented 3D concrete technology to create homes in India. They've done their first 3D printed concrete home, and they're now looking to scale. Another startup in India is Materials. In India, more than 100 million people live in slums, and they're often using corrugated metal sheets or asbestos as roofs for their homes, and they don't have other options. So Materials has created a product called Mod Roof, and it's made from agro waste, and it's waterproof. And it's not only affordable for families, but it reduces indoor temperature by more than 18 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you've been to India in the summer, you know that's quite huge. Another example is iBuild in South Africa, where mortgage lending is pretty much non-existent to low-income households. So iBuild offers mortgage financing to construct rental rooms. And once those rooms are constructed, the owners of the homes get a significant rental income, which exceeds what they had to invest to build the rooms. So I just wanted to give you these as examples of things that are happening in local markets, but the sum of the things that the Terwilliger Center is doing has shown some big results. And over almost 28 million people have now access to improved housing through these kinds of approaches. It's unlocked about $8 billion US for affordable housing finance. And one of my favorite statistics, it supported over 58,000 masons and artisans in improving their skills and getting certifications. So going back to your question, I think partnerships to create entrepreneurial solutions and make the market are absolutely critical here, critical to these solutions. And I think any solution for affordable housing and to attack these SDGs has got to be cross-sectoral and as entrepreneurial as we can make it.
Thank you, Julian. It's great to get some more examples from the Global South. So we'll turn it over to Frank now. Then, let's do last but not least.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll prefer to those. My name is Masood Ganchi from iPro Capital, which is a real estate investment company. And I'll go to my notes right now. Sustainable urban finance is a kind of critical phrase, as the concept of sustainability is a fundamental requirement for the future of our life on Earth. In parallel, as we are talking about financing sustainability, and in the literature and identity of finance, we are always talking about the benefit and risk factors and a clear, transparent business strategy and plan for implementation. Although in the concept of sustainability, we need to spend our resources for the future public benefit, in the world of finance and investment, we always want to measure the exact benefits and what we can generate and revenues and so on through different projects and products and so on. This is a conflict. We are always thinking how we can connect these two worlds with a creative bridge, how we can provide finance for fundamental sustainable projects in the cities. This is extremely important. Regarding this topic, I want to try to provide some of the key concepts and share some of the ideas. I believe that sustainability is a kind of approach. We are trying to find some solutions to create a better urban future and life, and the correct approach to take care about the resources on Earth, while also trying to respond to some of the fundamental needs that are required for creating a better society. However, this kind of concept does not always solely focus on the concept of public benefit. During the urban paradigm shift, we need to change much regarding our infrastructure. We also need to use technology and switch to green energy, specifically regarding urban mobility or typology of settlements. So we need to think about alternative and sustainable housing and utilize the specific methods available, such as City Prosperity Initiative Index, to create a better life for everyone. In all of these factors, we need to think of new business models and rethink our approach and cover some of the costs while providing some benefits. During the transitional period, our margin target for profitability may not be ideal, but we need to understand that this is a transitional process. And we understand clearly that this is a long-term strategy for change. Specifically, if we start to change soon, we can get results sooner. We can align our current business strategy with the sustainable model sooner. And in the previous and old-fashioned business models, specifically regarding investment, we are currently using solely the resources without paying attention that these resources belong to the people and are scarce. As people want to have a sustainable future on Earth for the next generations, we should not be depleting these much needed resources, as this is the correct strategy for the long term. While we also try to provide solutions for this kind of change, we need to utilize the available resources to support the sustainable urban development agenda and obtain resources from the government and so on. Otherwise, many of the current business models would not be aligned with this urban paradigm shift. Regarding the language and literature of this kind of change, we should create a specific language for investment and try to mobilize new and untapped resources for this kind of approach and try to facilitate an interactive dialogue between different investors. This is a unique area. For example, if you want to work on this kind of concept, you need to understand that this is a new and fundamental concept regarding sustainable urban finance. We can try to create a new diagram that includes public benefits at its core, yet still be able to have benefit sharing with the investors. Although creating this multidimensional model is difficult, it is doable, as creating better lives for everyone is a demand from the civil society. In this model, we are trying to involve and create a specific project and involve some of the financial institutions and encourage other potential partners to create this new room for investments. We will try to create a kind of win-win outcome for the public sector. This is an amazing opportunity for forming new partnerships. I4 Capital is proud to rethink establishing this very fundamental, creative, and innovative investment model for sustainable urban finance, and working with our partners at the public sector, municipalities, to raise small investments and create a big structure for urban finance. However, in this process, we understand that there are three critical questions that I would like to emphasize on. First, regarding the concept of sustainability, which is an ongoing concept that is developing day by day. People in the academic area are trying to enrich this concept. We are expected to make the shift to sustainability immediately, or will it be kind of a process? Second is who's responsible for providing flexible solutions and enabling new technologies for sustainable urban finance? The private sector or the private? Whose responsibility is it, and based on what amount? Finally, are we able to provide a kind of fundamental tool for realizing sustainable urban finance in a realistic background of cities? I hope we can all collaborate in this specific project and provide fundamental solutions and get the job done.
Thank you very much. And I know we're at lunch here. I just want to say that for me, the takeaway of this amazing panel was that we need to think about new business models, new partnerships, perhaps a new understanding of the role of public authorities beyond the local at many different scales, and as well with a focus on the ways in which people themselves, and I'm referring to our mayor, the mayor from Kingston, will be able to respond to these innovative and new models in the context of how they live their everyday lives. So thank you, everybody. It was a great panel.